serious? Parents of Reddit who decided to cut contact with your children. What's the story? Took a bit to decide if I wanted to share my story. But here goes. I'm the father in question. I have 3 kids. 2 daughters and 1 son. They are all adults. I got married at 20 and we had them one after another. 4 years. My wife and I blamed ourselves about how my youngest girl turned out. Being so young. Right out of community college. I wasn't making a lot. So I did the best I could. But we wonder if it was nutrition or the hole we stayed in or something that made her be born with severe BPD. We didn't know what it was at first. She was really difficult. We tried our best to raise her well. By the time we figured out what was wrong with her, she had set in really bad behaviors. We still think she's the one that mutilated the neighbor's cat but can't prove it. As of 2 years ago, she refused to take her medications. Was sleeping around with whoever would shoot her up with Drew Gus. Stealing money. And generally being really difficult. We told her to leave and never come back. Tried to get her into a state mental place but it wasn't an option. So we just closed our doors and moved shortly after. Honestly don't know what happened to her since. I tell people I only have 2 kids. Wife is devastated. But I'm just relieved. Sorry. Baby K. I don't love her. She doesn't love me and we have nothing in common. All names are changed. When I was 22 I met a beautiful woman who was in half my college classes but was a mature student. When Ella was 14 she'd given birth to a daughter Anna. By the time Ella and I moved in together Anna was already 15. It was like having a roommate. Anna was a great kid and all that jazz. But she wasn't interested in spending all that much time with some random man. Then 3 years later she moved out and I became the random ex-roommate who covers her tuition. People seem to think it's a tragedy. But we don't dislike each other. We're just not interested in contacting each other. We both love Ella and sometimes we happen to be spending time with her at the same time like when Anna comes home for Christmas. When I married Ella I promised to take care of Anna. I don't regret that. But my care falls mostly on the financial side although I went to every game she had and every teacher conference. We just failed to bond. She's more like a distant cousin than a daughter. My 33-year-old daughter chose Drew Gus and thug life over her husband and 2 boys. Hasn't seen her boys in 4 years. They're only 7 and 5. The oldest remembers her, the youngest does not. I've been dealing with her darkness since she was in 4th grade. Took her to countless therapists in her youth. She convinced them all she was fine. I tried to help her through probation and rehab again last year in the hopes of reuniting her with her boys. She was snorting. Now she's shooting. Nothing legal to keep her from these boys. She chose Drew Gus. I'm done. Never realized what an epidemic this has become until I started talking to people who are dealing with the same thing with loved ones. It's definitely effed up. I had a daughter when I was fairly young. I married her mother and spent a few hellish years with her until divorce became necessary. We agreed to split custody so long as she received full physical custody. It made sense under 3 circumstances. Within a few years, it became obvious my emotionally volatile ex-wife was just poisoning our daughter with absurd lies and to some extent, no doubt, her family as well. My kid became distant and then anxious around me. Her mom began to move an awful lot and it, eventually, became undeniable that she was intentionally hiding from me. I tracked her down on Christmas 2013 at a house her father directed me towards. She was livid that I showed up to say Merry Christmas and drop off gifts for my daughter and her younger sister. My daughter looked at me like a complete stranger. Even frightened. They were never home when I tried to visit after this and soon moved again. Realized no contact was available to me. Her mom called me from her mother's number months after and asked for a large sum of cash to pay for school stuff. It was April I think. I asked her where my daughter was before I agreed to anything and she got angry and hung up. I stopped trying I guess. I'm not really sure if this applies. When I was in the military overseas I was raped by another service member. When I came back to the CONUS, I ended up having an open adoption for the child. At first I wanted to visit and get to know the kid, but after the birth I just decided it's best not to for me and the kid. The only people that know about this is my boyfriend and immediate family. Otherwise I don't tell people that I've had a kid before. It's very hard sometimes. My stepson is a mess. My husband and his ex-wife divorced when SS was 18 months old. And mom had done whatever she could to cut dad completely out of his life until SS was 8, when she showed up at our door with SS in tow and his bags. She said she couldn't handle him anymore. All he would do was fight with his siblings, so if we didn't take him then she was going to take him to the children's home. Of course my husband was excited to finally spend time with his son. And he would get to bond with his little half-brother who was 4 at the time and stepsister who was 10. It became apparent very quickly that he had been fed lie after lie about his dad. He would gleefully share very detailed stories about the abuse that he remembered that he and his mom suffered at the hands of my husband. SS was in therapy, but really started escalating dangerous behaviors. My daughter would wake up in the middle of the night with him standing over her saying, "Next time you'll never wake up." So we put a lock on her door, which he broke through with ease. We put a deadbolt on her door. He broke the door frame trying to get to her. His little brother would walk by and he would kick him as hard as he could. He bit him until he would draw blood. The last straw for me was when he barricaded himself in his room with his little brother. I could hear my son screaming when I finally got in. My SS was molesting him. That for me was the last straw. He needed more help than what his therapist or he could do for him. The next day Child Services was contacted and he was removed from our home. A few weeks later CPS gave us pages and pages of psychological evaluations that his mom had on him. Pages of her blaming dad for each of his issues. Lies that he had beat and abused him, although there were statements from doctors that had clearly outlined that mom and her family had some seriously undiagnosed mental issues. There was so much information that would have been helpful before he came to live with us. I would never tell my husband that he cannot see his son. But his son is never allowed around my children. I made that promise to them both. And I hate that my husband is in the middle, but for our safety I've cut off any contact with my stepson. I'll try to keep this short because diving into all of what has happened that led to us cutting contact would be a novel. When I married my husband he already had 2 older children that lived with their mother. My husband and I ended up having 2 kids of our own. While my oldest was an infant, my stepchildren moved in with us and that's when everything started. They caused so many problems for us. I'm talking heavy drugs, sneaking out and getting arrested. You name it. The older of the 2 called CPS twice and made up lies about me being abusive. As a new mom the investigations were terrifying. But in the end they found their claims to be false. The final straw of them living with us was when we got wind of them pissing off the wrong crowd and the possibility of our home getting shot up. Their dad sent them to live with their mother. I'm just going to jump to when the actual cutoff happened. But keep in mind we had an endless amount of horrible incidents with them over the years. And we tried to help them countless times. They were both in their 20s at this point. Essentially, we discovered they were stealing from my side of the family. They robbed my sister of her fine jewelry and took what we totaled to be around $25,000 from 3 family members. Beyond that, they had a drug operation going on in a family member's summer cottage. The family member didn't know they were even there as he lived elsewhere most of the time. When confronted by their dad, they blew up. They said some of the most hateful things I've ever heard and spit in his face. That was it for us. They took advantage of people that love them very much and had no remorse for it. Cheap and easy to obtain heroin was the beginning of the end. Twice he robbed me of all my possessions, even my car. One 8-month stint in state jail during which I visited with his daughter every weekend, and upon release I brought him home only to be robbed again. 3 failed attempts in recovery centers, after which he and his girlfriend abandoned their children, leaving them with me for 4 years with no contact of any kind. At 32 years he is now unable to remain out of the county jails for more than a week at a time. I'm done. Heroin is a life wrecker. The body just isn't designed to have that sort of pleasure. It breaks your mentality. Wasn't me but my mom's brother. Was the youngest of 5 children, and there was one named Let's Go with Jake who was extremely abusive to my entire family. Twice he got one of my uncles in a headlock and choked him unconscious. The second time he would have killed him had my grandpa not saw it in time and kicked him off. Multiple times he attacked my grandpa. But being a veteran in the Korean War, obviously he could handle it. Attacked my grandma with a pan once, and that was the last straw, and my grandpa kicked him out of the house. It's been 24 years since anybody has last seen him. It's weird because there wasn't any Drew Gus at all. It was just some stuff going on in the head. My children ages 36 and 38 respectively refuse to grow up and still think sleeping on sleeping bags on a living room floor in friends' houses is neat. They came around to visit as long as I was feeding them, doing their laundry and giving them spending money, but refused to live with me because it meant getting a job. I finally cut the proverbial apron strings and said no more money. If you're hungry, I'll feed you. If you're sick, I'll get you medicine. If your clothes are dirty, you can wash them here. If you need showered, you can take it here, but I will not give you any more spending money. I haven't seen them in 10 years. My parents, mum and stepdad, have cut off contact with my oldest stepsister, my age, 32. Because she recently stole $16,000 off my mum and essentially refused to pay it back. She dragged it on and on for months and mentally exhausted my mum. She's the biggest piece of scum shit I've ever met. Her kids won't have their grandparents now. She's only ducked herself over. My uncle had this experience. He has 4 kids. 3 of which are married. 2 of which have kids. And are very happy. The first kid, however, who shared my uncle and grandfather's namesake, was not a good kid. From a very young age he was a kleptomaniac. My mom would babysit him when she was younger. Around 14 or 15 years old, she's much younger than my uncle. By over a decade. He would steal her wallet when she wasn't looking. He'd try to steal things from stores. The list goes on. They thought it was the kind of mischievous behavior that a kid could be led to do. And could be taught not to do. Now I don't know him very well. So I don't know all of the details. But essentially, he didn't stop. He'd steal cars, motorcycles, credit cards, and a whole host of things. When my uncle would help, it only ended up putting him in my cousin's radar for theft. Long story short, we don't see him at any family gatherings. Wow, you guys are really supportive and have helped me feel better about my choices. I have a couple of points to make after reading some of the comments. I have never stopped missing my son, the son I knew and loved as a child and young man. Hope remains, but not the delusions. Most importantly, however, I could not have done this alone. His older brother has been the backbone of our survival. He accepted our situation and his nieces without hesitation, never wavering in his love and affection in time. I moved to the same suburb he lives in and he sees them daily after school to help with homework, ensuring they are academically and socially successful. He keeps them at least one day a week while I drive into the nearby, in Texas terms, town for weekly work meetings. He loves them unconditionally and calls them my girls. Without his love and help, we would have sunk. Yesterday he sent me a link to a house for sale with a pool in the backyard. He has high hopes and expectations and keeps us all on our toes and moving forward. Thank you for all the kind comments and for sharing your stories. It really has been so very heartwarming and helpful. Not like most stories in here, but I probably have 100s of kids all over the world. I funded my entire undergrad, minus tuition, by going to sperm bank 3 times a week for 5 years. If every sample I ever left was used, I'd have well over 500 chitlins. So I guess you can kinda say I cut contact. I just hope one day they all call me and I can assemble my army to rule the world. This post almost made me cry at work. I'm such a piece of shit and my parents are so helpful and they love me so much. I can't even express my feelings right now. There's something called back child support. Also, abandonment is caused to terminate parental rights. Just a heads up from a former family law attorney. I'm not a parent. I was the child in this. Ever since my parents were teens. They were doing some kind of drug. They were in and out of my life all the time. I was, and I still am, provided with a stable home where I know I am loved and taken care of and always will be. Still, the emotional pain is always there. That's a thing that never goes away when your parents are the way mine have been and always will be. I was able to reach them somehow at all times. Until one day, I got sick of my mom always promising the same things as we both knew she could never keep them. I stopped talking to my mother. Tough decision for a 9-year-old. People in my family to this day still ask me to talk to her. My aunt and uncle, who I live with, always respected my decision because she never did anything to help me. If I wanted to talk to her, they'd respect that too. Was hoping to find my mom on here. If anyone is curious, she left when I was in 2nd grade. I think I know why, but I've always wondered how she felt about it all. She always seemed like a loving person. Except she used to joke that she found me in a dumpster. Confusing for a 2nd grader. Anyway, I actually managed to find her address 20 some years later. And unbelievably on accident. Credit karma, yo.